Let's go ahead and jump in. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar, Engaging Audiences in a Flash, the Rise of AI and Micro Content. I'm very excited to be joined by Debbie West with Audere Communications, who specializes in podcasting and content creation for many customers around the world. It's a great partnership that we've been fortunate to have here at Soundbite. And I'm Mike Lancy with Soundbite by means of introduction and helping organizations envision, create, and share engaging content with their people, no matter where they are around the world. So welcoming you today, a couple housekeeping items. First and foremost, this is Microsoft Teams for webinars. If you are not familiar with Teams and are in the web experience, you'll probably notice a ribbon bar above the top. There you should see a Q&A button as well as a hand raise. We can support either or, so if you'd like to ask questions throughout, feel free to drop those in or simply raise your hand and I'd be happy to unmute you so that you can pose a question that way. And with that being said, I'd love to introduce you to Debbie and let her give you a quick overview of her background, and we'll jump into the agenda for today.
Thank you very much, Mike, and thanks for outlining the housekeeping and things. And it's lovely to see people joining the webinar. So yeah, my name's Debbie. I work with Audere Communications. We're a marketing agency and we specialise in producing podcast and video content. And we were really excited to meet with Mike and see some of the great things that Soundbite can do. So we've had some really high energy conversations since that meeting. So yeah, it's great that we get to share that with you today. And my background, I recently worked in internal communications, both in-house, in agency, and as a consultant. So I've seen kind of all sides of the internal communications journey. And prior to that, I worked in learning and development. And in both of those careers, I particularly specialised in digital content and reaching people who were outside of offices or difficult to reach. So yeah, it's been a really interesting journey for me through that digital scene over the last 10 or so years. So yeah, thanks, Mike.
I love it. And, you know, as we kind of jump into today's content, for everybody out there, we are not a slide heavy organization. And our conversation today will be very much like that of many of our conversations when creating engaging content with organizations, right? We hear a lot about authenticity and then we get onto calls like this. And the next thing you know, it's like, wham, 34 slides, right? And one of the agreements that we had around our best practices for our clients was actually going people first. And we are the people that you have today. We love what we do, right? That's one thing I will say out of the gate. That Debbie and I love this stuff. And I hope that this conversations we have helps you kind of see the conversations that we've had around how we can help organizations jump into digital. So a little bit about that. I wanted to open up with a question for Debbie, right? And you said some key words, setting the digital scene, right? You know, can you give me a quick kind of overview of the current digital landscape and your perspectives on it? Coming into COVID, out of COVID, back to office, not back to office, right? I'd love to understand your perspectives on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think a lot of us had to learn a lot of lessons very quickly through the pandemic in terms of creating digital content if we hadn't been doing that up to that point, because there was suddenly a very urgent need to be able to reach out to people using virtual means. And although now COVID, it seems such a long time ago, but we're still in that process of refinding our way back into a working pattern. Some of those digital kind of habits have fallen away, but we've kept some of them and we've learned quite a lot of lessons. And I think our sort of maturity with using digital content has come quite a long way in those years. And now that people are going back to offices and we're re-exploring what it means to work from an office, work remotely, there's a move away from that kind of back-to-back meeting culture that seemed to get established through the pandemic. But however, we do still need to be able to contact people in a range of different working patterns, in a range of different locations. You know, we've very much got used to that kind of global organization setup where we're able to connect with people across time zones and, you know, across different working patterns. So yeah, there's more need for digital now than ever, I would say, and well considered, well put together digital content. So yeah, are you finding the same, Mike? Would you say the same?
I think, yeah, I really do. So I think it's a really interesting topic around that specifically, because the pandemic and the remote work that I've always been remote personally. So like, I don't even know what it's like to go to an office. So my communications have been digital first for 20 plus years, right? Both big, small companies, et cetera. So I wouldn't really know any different. But when I talk with a lot of folks these days, I think one of the things that people have become accustomed to is that digital first experience, right? And a lot of just what we were stuck in during the pandemic was this live meeting, one-on-one conversation. And where we have seen more and more adoption pick up is the term asynchronous, right?
Yeah.
And the types of communications that can be delivered by somebody like myself easily to an audience of people, but not have to have them there physically at any given one time, right? And there's some benefits to that. There's benefits around convenience. There's benefits around timing. There's benefits around analytics, even for the people creating that type of content, right? And I think more importantly, it brings us into this other conversation topic where I think you have some stats to share from IOIC is our attention spans. I can't sit in a meeting for more than about 5 minutes without my butt getting sore. And once my butt goes, my mind goes, right? And I think the same could be said for a lot of audiences around the world when we think this way. And then the other thing, if you look at the consumerization of various media and trends across even multiple generations, my parents are in Porto right now, actually in Portugal.
Oh,
And they've
wow.
been sending us short videos. My parents are 65, 70 years old. They're sending the family TikToks, right, of
Yeah.
their experiences in Porto and their 1 month in Portugal. And I think that says something about what our kind of like attention span looks like today and how we can maybe take some of that and apply it to business to help
Yeah.
engage people with better content. And I'd love it if maybe you could talk a little bit about that and your experience on the
Yeah.
consulting side. So
Yeah, for sure. And I think you touched on the statistics from the IOIC. One of the very interesting things that came out of the recent report they published about internal communications, which was based on very robust research, suggested that employees typically have about 15 minutes a day to focus on the kind of corporate internal communications that we're quite used to sending out, which is quite a very small time in somebody's whole day. And I think in terms of attention, it's not necessarily that our attention span has shrunk, because we can all sit for 3 hours through the Oppenheimer movie, for example, or something that we really want to focus on. I think some of that is about well-being and giving people more flexibility of how they manage their time. So there's certainly call, for example, for meetings to be shorter, but you're right, it's about being able to access the content you need at the time you need to access it. So the point you made about asynchronicity, I think, is spot on. And I think what we've unlocked now is more of an understanding that you can connect with asynchronous content if it's quite dynamic and engaging. So not a flat white paper of 24 pages to read. Okay, take that and read it on the train. It's like if it's a 1 minute video of somebody giving you an overview of what was in that white paper, you could watch that at any time now. It doesn't have to be a live FaceTime meeting, but you get more of a sense of that person's excitement, emotion, urgency, however they feel about that content, and you're getting their first person summary of that too. So that gives you much more connection in with the content, and there you may choose to go and look at the longer form source that came from, for example. And when you go and look at it, you may be more positively inclined to engage with that for longer anyway, because it's on your terms, in your time, you're already interested in it because of that little kind of snippet you've got from somebody who's given you that sort of hook, that inroad into that content. So yeah, I think there's quite a lot in that.
well,
And yeah, tell us, Mike, how does Soundbite specifically help with that problem, in terms of creating virtual connections, for people who
yeah.
are distributed?
Well, I think it's a really fascinating thing you brought up because we oftentimes will engage with folks and they'll say, hey, we've got this podcast or we're creating this series of podcasts. We want to help get people into it. And
Yeah,
what you mentioned right there, this concept of signposting, right? Putting something out there that is a commercial for people to be able to then access longer content with their interest will ultimately keep them in that content for longer.
yeah,
And that concept around taking shorter form with long form content to help create engaging experiences, we continue to see to take off, right? And I think that's a really important concept, regardless of how people do it, that folks can implement today, right? And receive immediate value, get more value from investments that they've made.
Yeah.
And then also provide a better communications experience for the audiences that are out there, right? And as part of that, I think it brings us into this really kind of interesting conversation around kind of the art and science, right, behind digital storytelling. Digital storytelling, to me, there's a shift of what people want versus what a lot of companies are providing. And there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect between what we consume in our daily lives and what we're given in the corporate environment. And I think that disconnect is a huge opportunity, right, for people to learn from what makes engaging conversation, what makes engaging content on the consumer side, and actually apply it to everyday life on the business side. And it might be a little bit uncomfortable at first, right, for people to do that. But once they kind of cross that, the sky becomes kind of the limit. And I'd love for you maybe just to walk me through a little bit about how just storytelling for you, right, has evolved, right, in this digital age, and things that you guys are doing around that to help people really jump in and dive in and live within that content.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as communicators, we've probably all read lots of sources that tell us about storytelling, how important it's been through human evolution, and how people take in information much more readily through a story than through, other forms of communication. So it is really important for us to sort of understand. And very, very simply, it's just about approaching a particular topic from a particular point of view. So it's providing that kind of first person perspective on something and building a little narrative around that. And why digital is so powerful in terms of storytelling is there's so many different layers you can include in digital formats. So it could be that you've got visual layers, so that could be static images or video, moving images, and you've got audio, so you've got that tone of voice, and also an audio backdrop. So can you hear somebody in a crowded room? Can you hear somebody in a silent situation? And then you've got other elements you can add. You can add interactive elements. So you pause and encourage somebody to respond. So it kind of assesses whether they're still with your content, or, if they want to direct how the content shifts, for example. There's all sorts of layers you can add in digital. So it really helps you to create a story that appeals to people intellectually and emotionally at the same time. So you get that real head and heart engagement in what you're trying to say. And once you've crafted a story, even if it's a very long story, you can typically get to the heart of that story, find the real emotional impact or the real intellectual impact, and distill down to that absolute nugget of, this is what's critical about this story. This is what we really want to pass on to you. Now, if you want to hear the whole story, tune in to the bigger form content. So it's that kind of skill, I think, that we're refining as digital creators.
Yeah, and that brings up a really interesting point, because a lot of what we kind of do sometimes is help people distill that down into relatable, bite-sized bits of content, right? And I'll share a couple with everybody here in a minute around just, hey, here's a topic around getting your leaders on camera, right? How do we get leaders on camera in 90 seconds or less, right?
Yeah.
And what does that look like? Or, when it comes to just learning and other types of communications, where there might be a much broader instruction manual, right, for it, but giving people a taste of the outcome in a short video or a short piece of audio will give them the why as to, like, why should I dive into this 20-minute conversation, or why should I dive into this 40-page manual, right? Like to really, so it allows you, I think, to extract the outcome and literally put it right in front of people on a platter, right? And I'll go ahead and give everyone a quick example with a piece of content where this came with a manual. It was a demo day that I did yesterday. And it's just one of those things that you can't go without showing when you're a parent, because it's just ultimately fun. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. I presume everybody can see my desktop. And we are jumping into Teams. One of the joys of Microsoft Teams for webinar is we sometimes get it. And we've got this hydraulic box launch, right? And this thing came with a manual. But at the end of the day, if you really want to get into it.
So today we'll be talking about hydraulics.
Okay.
And I made this my own way, so I had to make a password. And if I push this one right here will pull it up, which is in the back right here. I push it, it'll go up. It's called hydraulics. That if you push it, this one goes up. If you push it, this one goes up. And that's how you do it. And then you can like see I put some stuff in there. And I made my own.
So all of the things you just mentioned, Debbie, I chose to pick for this piece of content right now, in real time, right? You mentioned background noise. You mentioned the whole concept around like what's going on, right? Is it exciting? Is it engaging? Is it sanitary, right? Like the dynamic nature of audio and video content allows for people to really live inside the moment, I believe, right? You can transport yourself into the conversation, into the dialogue. You get that rich emotion, etc. And I think that's some of the intangible things that you can't measure as to why, right? When people ask us, well, really, can you give me the hard number on why people do that? I said, no, I mean, can you give me a hard number on your feelings, right? When you feel love, how do you articulate that into something, right? When you feel anger, how do you articulate that into a number? And it's virtually impossible for most people, right? And I think that is one example there of how we could take that and then back a longer form conversation or manual, right, on the type of content. How did we actually construct this from the beginning? So that's one quick example of a signpost, right, for a much longer type of conversation. Now, as part of that, though, I think it kind of transitions us into another part of the conversation, which could be quite important for a lot of organizations. But how do we get the most out of this, right? So if we're looking at like flair, artistic nature, all these types of things, there's this whole conversation, hot word, buzzword, right? External communications. I hear it everywhere. And we want to have content that can be used on both sides of the equation. How do you view external communications? And then specifically, how do you kind of view the applicability of like podcasting and audio and video, right, into the overall strategy for a company to pull all that together and make it work, right?
Yeah, for sure. So by external, we mean content that's designed to be internal or content that's designed to be external or content that kind of crosses that.
Yep.
What used to be a little bit of a border that's sort of been dissolving, I think, for quite a long time, particularly since the sort of rise of social media. So yeah, I mean, in podcasting, we think we're in a really great space to embrace that concept of mixternal. So we work with some, super clients. We've got a great client, Millennial. We produce their podcast, which they set up as an external only, effectively, piece of content and series directed at people outside their organization. And they found to their delight that the people inside their organization love that just as much. And in fact, they use that podcast as an internal book club, and it's become part of their kind of training dialogue. And so it's really, they're kind of uniting that education process across their whole external and internal stakeholder base effectively. And that's been really successful. And conversely, we find that, podcast content that's created for employees or by employees that addresses cultural issues. And we know that, a lot of internal communicators are particularly keen on championing culture and helping to create the right cultures for their organizations. When those are shared externally, they're a great source for people who are looking, they're in the job market and they're looking at companies to assess whether or not that's kind of the right culture for them. Well, hearing that content that's created, by employees for employees externally gives them that insight directly. And that content, it may be predominantly audio, but we also are increasingly asked to create video content side by side with podcasts. So gone are the days when podcast is an audio only medium. It's now really more typically both. And so we've got some visual content and some audio content that gives that kind of cultural insight, which people find so valuable. So yeah, podcasting is right in that external comms space, and we're really enjoying that conversation. Yeah.
So what is it, if you were to give a couple tips, right? So like in order to get this right? Like what would you say kind of the most important things are to get it right? So if I'm going to go invest some time and getting people involved and kind of building some of this out, like what are the key things we need to get right out of the gate to make sure that we have a successful mixternal approach?
Yeah, good question. I think it's really about getting the basics in place, and it's about having good guidance in terms of, what is our tone of voice? What's our tone of voice, and how kind of far does it flex? You tend to find that podcast content maybe is a little bit more relaxed than, you know, classical corporate content. But how relaxed can it be, or how relaxed is it appropriate for it to be? So what's our tone of voice, and what's our kind of range, and what emotions and associations do we want to convey with what we're creating? You know, who are we primarily creating it for, but who else might that content reach, and what do we really want to convey to those people? So, you know, that will kind of filter through everything that you do in terms of how formal do you want that to be, or how scripted or unscripted. What do you want that to look like? Will it always, you know, be filmed or recorded in the same place so it's got a kind of corporate backdrop, or will it be on the hoof and very kind of spontaneous and, you know, earthy and on the ground? So it's really thinking it all through, exactly, you know, who you're talking to, how do you want them to perceive you, what are you getting across to them, and how do you want them to respond to you emotionally, you know, across the board, and how, you know, how does that fit in with your sort of tone of voice? So yeah, get those basics sorted, and then when you're comfortable with those, then let your creativity kind of, you know, run with that. I would say, yeah.
And how does that air? Like, so if you look at it from like a external perspective, right? I meet you, we say, hey, we want to go do this. Like, what does that playbook look like? Like, what are kind of some of the best practices or things that you guys do programmatically to help us kind of bring it all together, right? So maybe tell me a little bit about the business and what you do with that. So.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I guess, you know, what we really want to understand is, why do you want to do this? What do you really want to get out of this? You know, and what side benefits might come of this, and really craft something that fits in with what you're trying to do. You know, what's your brand all about? What's really important to you? And make sure that we never lose sight, you know, of those kind of polarizing things, really, as we create what we create, and then think about how we can multi-purpose what we're doing. So we can create a great audio podcast, and while we're there, actually, this would be great on video. We can video this and capture the moment, and then actually this would make an amazing 60-second clip on your social media. And then, you know, you might find that lots of other people will tag into that and share that in their network, and it'll be, you know, great for you to showcase how fantastic you are at that particular thing, or how that really aligns with what you say your brand values are, and, you know, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's understanding, you know, what people want to achieve, and then kind of maximizing what we can get out of the content they're creating, and, you know, making sure that we get as many connections for them as we can with that. So yeah, and yeah. And I guess from your perspective, Mike, anything you've got to add to that? When you go in to talk to somebody fresh, what kind of do you?
That's what we're always looking for, right? Or we're always trying to encourage. You know, we come across a lot of folks that have made investments, and it's like, all right, well, whatever happened to that, right? And it kind of just disappeared. And it's like, all right, let's bring that back. What's in there, right? Like, there's gold in there somewhere. Let's go ahead and repurpose some of that for sure. So yes.
Yeah.
So we've got a few minutes left. I wanted to open it up to Q&A for the audience members out there. You know, we've covered informally a lot today, just constructive conversation. We touched upon kind of the evolving digital landscape, right? The transition, the story, everything that's going on from COVID to back to work to consumer preferences and trends. We've covered the concept around long form and short form content, how they work together, right? How you can use short form content to signpost longer form, more engaging content to get people to actually engage longer, set their expectations. I like to call it set the table, right? For dinner. Here's a nice little appetizer. Now I'm going to sit down. I'm going to commit 30 minutes to having this meal with you. And then we also covered a little bit about, like, what does this look like? How do we engage, right? How do we start to work with clients in that perspective? And then what are some of the things clients are struggling with as well? So I'd love to, for anybody out there, just open it up for Q&A. We've got about 3 minutes left, and then we'll wrap it up with the quick outro.
So I think we've got a question already. Is that Rocco? I hope I've said that correctly, who said the podcast I'm describing audio only. So no, not necessarily. They can be. Some people still choose audio only podcasts, and that's their real passion. We're delighted to support that. Quite often we make a video version and an audio version of a podcast. Particularly now, we're finding YouTube is very popular external channel, or sometimes used as an internal channel, and it's a popular kind of search engine for people to find the content they're looking for. for. And sometimes they find that content on YouTube or the video aspect of the content and then go back and listen to the audio. So it's important for quite a lot of our clients to be in both of those places. And we also find a little piece of video goes a long way in terms of signposting the podcast. So even if it's just the first few minutes of your podcast or a little section, very short section of the podcast that's also video, then we find people love to see that. They love to see who they're listening to. And then again, they may go away and listen to the audio, but they've got that image in their mind of who they're listening to. So yeah, the full spectrum, from audio only to all video to half and half. So yeah.
Yep. And there's one other question there. So how can communicators encourage leaders and companies to make selfie style clips for their teams? That's always a really fun conversation. And I'd say that luckily there's a lot of leaders in a lot of organizations. So you don't have to just go condense one. Oftentimes what we find is that they're back to the original statement that Debbie made. What are the goals, right? What are we trying to accomplish? And then what are our challenges? We've had customers come to us and say, look, we have done our engagement surveys. We have all the data in the world. Our employees don't trust us. They don't trust our communications. They don't trust our leaders. How do we encourage our leaders? Well, take them that data. That's first and foremost. Show them the data that supports the reason why they need to create better connections with your employees and foster that kind of trustworthy comms. And then give them support. So one of the key things that we have found to be extremely helpful is providing media training to leaders. And I'm always surprised how few leaders actually have had some form of formal media training.
Mm-hmm.
I think through that, it then becomes practice makes perfect. And the level of comfort for most folks on video becomes a lot greater, a lot faster. And I see it time and time again. The moment an executive commits to media training with a communicator, the better they get. And frankly, I meet with a lot of communicators that I think need media training, right? They're great at writing content. They're great at writing articles, but even in their own right, they might not be comfortable with camera, right? And here they are trying to convince folks. So one of the things that we sometimes do with communicators is, hey, let me help you get comfortable so you can make other people comfortable. It's that whole so-do-to, right? Show once, do once, teach once. So we tend to take that approach when it comes to helping leaders, not just encourage them, but actually enable them to be able to communicate on video. So, yeah.
Those are great points. Yeah, sorry, did we have any questions?
No, and I think we are up on time. I want to be respectful of everybody's calendars. We had a half-hour scheduled for today. We will share this recording with everyone following the meeting, and we will then provide you with mechanisms to provide feedback, et cetera, through there. And I want to thank everybody for joining today. Looks like there's one more question. What AI platforms you've used for podcasts? So Soundbite is a communication solution that brings together podcasting, video, and text together in one. So in our world, you don't need to have a specific podcast platform. You don't need to have a specific video platform. It's an all-in-one solution. And what makes it really unique, Abhishek, is it's all done within the apps people use today. So we turn Microsoft Teams into a podcast. We turn it into a video app. We turn it into TikTok. And we found that engagement through that and not having to convince people to go download or find a piece of content, be able to deliver it to them, yields to a great amount of engagement. And of course, everything we do is powered by AI. Love to share that with you in the future. It's pretty cool stuff. So.
Great.
Okay. All right, I'll give it 2 seconds for questions. And I want to thank everybody for joining. Debbie, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I'm excited to get some sound bites out of this and start using those on LinkedIn and on our blog and everything. A little external communications from this. And we'll also be sharing this internally with our teams so that they can hear what people are thinking about when it comes to creating content and what some of the trends are that you're seeing. So thanks again for joining today. And I hope everybody has a great rest of your Wednesday.
Perfect. Thanks for the invitation, Mike. It's been lovely speaking to you.
Take care. Okay.
Yeah, bye. Take care.